All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for making it through the cold rain and the threat of the virus this morning to join us. We very much appreciate it. We appreciate those joining us via Zoom as well. So let's jump in. Let's start with the liturgy we've been doing these last few weeks. So if you can, please repeat after me. Love is patient.
Love is patient.
Love is kind.
Love is kind.
Love does not envy or boast.
Love does not envy or boast.
Love does not insist on its own way.
Love does not insist on its own way.
Love is not irritable or resentful.
Love is not irritable or resentful.
Love does not rejoice at wrongdoing.
Love does not rejoice in wrongdoing.
Love rejoices with the truth.
Love rejoices with the truth.
Love bears all things.
Love bears all things.
Love believes all things.
Love believes all things.
Love hopes all things.
Love hopes all things.
Love endures all things.
Love endures all things.
Amen. I'll say a quick prayer to get us started. Dear Lord, our Father in heaven, our just judge, we come to you this morning to ask for your blessing upon this gathering. May our words be glorifying to you and edifying to one another. May we speak in holiness and truth. And God, we ask that you would fan the fires within us, God, of a passion, a zeal for your justice. God, we look around ourselves and our family lives, in our community, in our country, and around the world. It's so much injustice. And God, it is so easy to be discouraged. God, give us encouragement. Inspire us, God, to pursue your justice here on earth. So in the name of our Lord and Savior, your Son, through the power of your Holy Spirit, we pray. Amen. So today we are going to be talking about Christian thinking about criminal justice, which I'm especially excited about. In my day job, I do lots of work with criminal justice. As many of you may know, I represent the state of Indiana as Deputy Solicitor General, and I work on lots of civil cases, but also lots of criminal cases too, so see firsthand how our criminal justice system works, and I'm excited to talk with you about that today. And because now, finally, after many weeks of lead up, we are talking about concrete issues, and this is perhaps an issue that some of you may have thought about, may have strong opinions on. And I want to encourage you to jump in with questions or comments if there's anything you'd like to say during today's discussion. But first, opening us up this morning, I'd like to break into small groups before we get into the remarks to talk about a few discussion questions. So I've listed a few questions on the PowerPoint for the folks on Zoom and on the handout for those of you in person. So why don't we split up into a handful of small groups for those of us here in person, maybe 3 or 4 people to a group, and talk about the questions that we have there on the handout. In particular, let's talk about first, how does your faith, if at all, affect how you think about criminal justice? And relatedly, is there any respect in which American Christians' approach to criminal justice differs from their non-Christian neighbors? And should there be? And then lastly, are there 2 or 3 concrete criminal justice issues in particular that you find vexing or especially difficult to come to a conclusion about? And I'd especially like you, if you could, to identify a few of those, because I'd like to hear what people's thoughts are after we come back to the big group. So let's go ahead and break out. All right. So it sounds like we had some good conversations. So first, Sam, if I could ask you to solicit the folks on Zoom if they had any comments they would like to share with the class
Let's do comments here first.
Oh, okay.
Because they're
Got
still
it.
coming back from
Got
breakout.
it. Perfect.
Yeah.
On the first two questions at least, are there anything that anyone would like to share about how their faith affects their views of criminal justice, or more descriptively, how American Christians' faith affects their views of criminal justice? Any thoughts that emerge from our conversation? Yes, great.
From total revenge to redemption.
Yeah, the views. So, for the folks on Zoom, Greg was saying that the views range wildly from the Christian idea that criminal justice should be about taking vengeance, and then on the opposite extreme, that criminal justice should be about extending grace and mercy. And we'll get to that today. I'm excited about it. And I'm to be honest, more interested in this last question. What were some of the issues that folks talked about as especially difficult? You can just shout them out. The death penalty. Very good. Inequities in application of our criminal justice laws. That's very, very good. Excellent. Do we have anything from Zoom, Sam?
Let's see. Not yet.
Okay, no problem. So feel free to, for the folks on Zoom, feel free to continue to send them in as we continue. So,
One.
Yes.
Juvenile justice.
Oh, juvenile justice. Very good. Very good. Well, I'll mention that later on, because that's very timely. The Indiana Supreme Court just issued 2 juvenile sentencing cases this week, which we'll talk about very briefly in a few minutes. So, I hope that the conversation just now at least got you all thinking about how difficult some of these questions are in criminal justice. And I hope in the brief time we have today to explore why they are so difficult and to provide a framework for thinking about them. And if you'd like, we can talk about some concrete issues later on. So I've divided up sort of the difficulties associated with criminal justice issues into 2 categories. So the first is the conceptual complexity that attends thinking on criminal justice, and then the second is the factual complexity. And so to begin with the conceptual complexity, that's the third slide on the handout. Most Christian thinking on criminal justice begins with this idea of lex talionis, which is Latin for the law of retaliation. And this idea appears multiple times in the Pentateuch. We have several examples there on the slides, and one that I didn't put on the slide but is especially important is from Genesis 9:6. So this is when God is making a covenant with Noah following the flood, and God says, "And for your lifeblood I will require a reckoning. From every beast I will require it, and from man. From his fellow man I will require a reckoning for the life of man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image." And it's important to see that this, what suggests this sort of mirror punishment, if you take a life, your life will be taken. That this verse grounds that idea in the Imago Dei, that because we each bear God's image, taking a life is extremely serious. And in fact, justifies, and we might even say, some interpreters would say, requires taking a life in response. So, this idea that eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, It has inspired lots and lots of Christian reflection. And I think it's fair to say that there are lots of folks, both today and even in the 1st and 2nd centuries, the early church, who saw this idea, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, as barbaric and uncivilized, as vengeful, just seemingly non-Christian, even though it appears in the Pentateuch. And I'd like you to consider what Augustine says about it. So he says that this idea, lex talionis, is actually an important limit on punishment. So he says, quote, "To put a restraint upon a revenge, unjust from its excess, the law established the principle of compensation, that the penalty should correspond to the injury inflicted. So the precept, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, instead of being a brand to kindle a fire that was quenched, was rather a covering to prevent the fire already kindled from spreading." Some beautiful imagery, and this gets at the idea that lex talionis reflects a principle of retributive justice. So and what we mean by retributive justice, and this is, I should say, this word is not meant to have any negative connotations, it's just a description of a particular way of thinking about justice, is that retributive theories say it is good to impose upon someone who deserves it a proportionate punishment. So I want to emphasize those 3 things. Those are 3 crucial elements of the retributist way of thinking about justice. So 1, that punishment is good, that it is intrinsically good, not merely as an instrument to accomplishing some other end, such as deterrence, but that it is good, so that so Kant, perhaps the most famous retributist philosopher, at least in modern times, said that if society were crumbling and there were murderers in the prison, we would need to execute them before everything ended, because it would be, even if there was no good that would come of it instrumentally, but that it's just good to execute a murderer. It's just a good thing. That's sort of the retributivist idea, that when a wrong is committed, there is an imbalance in the universe, and that needs to be corrected, and it's good to correct it. So that's the first part, that punishment is intrinsically good. And then the second, though, is that it is good only insofar as it is imposed on someone who deserves it. So again, this means that even if it might be useful to impose a punishment on an innocent person, right, as a way of deterrence, for example, to frighten everyone else into doing what they're supposed to do, a retributive theory says that's not allowed. You can only impose punishments on people who deserve it. So a retributive theory of justice takes punishing the innocent extremely seriously. That's just something that cannot be done. And then lastly, and really most crucially for our purposes, is that punishment must be proportionate. So that it is good to punish someone proportionately and bad to punish someone disproportionately. And for most retributivists, this goes both ways. So an excessively punitive punishment is bad and is off the table regardless of how useful it might be. And an excessively lenient punishment, many retributivist thinkers would say is also bad, because it's good to punish someone exactly as much as they deserve. So this idea of lex talionis has historically been closely connected with this view of justice. And then one interesting thing, this is as an aside, that I found interesting as I was researching this for today, it's worth noting that in the Mosaic Law, as you can see on the left side of the slide, where the lex talionis, eye for an eye, is found in the Old Testament, in the Mosaic Law, the Mosaic Law expressly excludes monetary compensation or ransom for only one crime, murder. And many scholars have interpreted that to mean that for all other crimes, rather than literally eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, the offender could buy their peace. So in other words, that an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth was a way of establishing the monetary compensation that would be paid to the victim because of the offense. So it was not, even in ancient Israel, it was not literally followed for every offense. That's from the textual evidence in the Mosaic Law itself. So I just offer that for your consideration. But even then, even if we understand it in those terms, it's clear that eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth is committed to this idea of proportionate punishment, right? That if you take an eye, your life isn't taken, but your eye is taken, right? The idea that it's proportionate, and that proportionality is measured by this mirror approach. So, before we move to the next slide and talk about how the gospel might change our thinking on this, I want to note that even taken as itself, proportionality, or at least lex talionis, can present problems. So mirror punishments are frequently impossible, or at least seemingly inappropriate, in all kinds of instances. So theft. So if you steal something, it doesn't really make sense to say that we will steal something from you. It would be, by definition, not theft in that situation. Or defamation, right? You falsely say some horrible things about someone. It would be inappropriate for us for the state to respond by falsely saying bad things about you. That's sort of nonsensical. Or drug crimes or sex crimes. There are all kinds of situations where it would be difficult to apply this mirror understanding of proportionality in any case. And then today, in particular, proportionality can be difficult to apply because most of our criminal punishments are prison sentences. And deciding how many years of prison a particular crime merits can be extremely difficult. Extremely difficult. And it can be difficult to even begin to reason about how we would understand, how do we determine that? So much of our thinking about this is just based on our intuitions, and our intuitions can vary wildly. As I mentioned, the Indiana Supreme Court decided a couple of juvenile sentencing cases this week, and one of them involved a brutal murder committed by a 16-year-old, I believe, of a younger sibling. And the 16-year-old lived a horrible, horrible childhood, an enormous amount of abuse. And the murder, though, was very heinous. And the Indiana Supreme Court, when the case initially came up through the appellate system more than a decade ago, affirmed a sentence that was well over 100 years. So, in effect, the offender would likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. But now, this time, the case went back to the Indiana Supreme Court for a variety of reasons we don't need to get into, and the Indiana Supreme Court reduced the sentence to 80 years, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that it was roughly that. And the point there is that you have this horribly complicated circumstance, and people on the Indiana Supreme Court, different justices for different times, looking at these facts and having different intuitions about what the right punishment should be. And it's really difficult to understand how do we begin to decide that for a particular crime. What really is the proportionate punishment? So that's the difficulty with proportionality. So that already creates some serious conceptual difficulties. So next we have the gospel. So that's if you like the extreme simplified version. So if we're just relying on the Mosaic Law. But now we have the gospel, which adds an extra layer of complexity. So the key verse here, as I'm sure you may have realized when we began talking about eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, is the Sermon on the Mount, where Christ says, "You have heard that it was said, eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you." And, I mean, it is hard to imagine a more explicit contrast to the lex talionis as described in the Mosaic Law. Christ literally says, "You have heard this said, but I tell you." So, what do we do with this? Extremely difficult question. And the contemporary Reformed political theologian David Van Drunen has observed that the difficulties caused by this contrast, this seeming tension between the Mosaic Law's adoption of lex talionis and Christ's teaching on the Sermon on the Mount has created practically innumerable difficulties. And he notes that there are a vast range of interpretations that Christians have offered over the centuries to understand how these two ideas fit together. So some, and I've listed 5 different theories there on the slide for you. So some say we should take the Sermon on the Mount literally, that Christ has abrogated the Mosaic Law, or at the very least that Christians cannot participate in a retributive system of justice. So we have to withdraw from political life and legal life. Others say not only should we take this literally, but rather than withdrawing from political life, we should be trying to revolutionize, to change our system of criminal justice so that the society in which we live does not abide by the lex talionis. And then third, he says, for still others, the verses are to be taken literally by some Christians, those devoted to a higher righteousness. This would be sort of the medieval monastic approach. And then number 4, he says, for others, they are to be taken literally by all Christians, but only in regard to their private lives and their own self-defense, not in regard to the loving defense of other people for which they may still use force. You may remember that this is, from a few weeks ago, this is essentially the traditional mainline Protestant Reformation approach. So Luther and Calvin. That is the approach that they generally took, that individual Christians should be peaceable and refuse to take vengeance, but should be willing to insist that the state take vengeance on their behalf. So there's sort of a private life, public life dichotomy. And then 5, for still others, the verses are not to be taken literally, but as simply a hyperbolic and exaggerated defense of commending a general attitude of deference and love. So, which would make it even easier to justify the application of lex talionis in the criminal justice context. So we are not going to adjudicate these different interpretations today, but I just want to offer them to you as illustrative of the complexity caused by this interaction between the Mosaic approach to criminal justice and what appears to be Christ's approach to justice as articulated in the Sermon on the Mount. And I'd just like to pause for a moment to say that we noted that lex talionis has been historically interpreted as describing a retributive theory of justice, and some Christian thinkers have understood Christ on the Sermon on the Mount to be offering a different theory of justice, a theory that some thinkers call restorative. And just to describe that briefly to you, recall that a key element of retributive theories of justice is that punishment is an intrinsic good. And a restorative theory of justice says punishment is not intrinsically good. It is only instrumentally good. that punishment is good only insofar as it restores relationships. So that means, under a restorative theory, that if a relationship can be restored without punishment, or with a lesser degree of punishment than might otherwise be called for, that's good. That's good. So if a victim says the offender has shown contrition, has apologized, and I forgive them, then the relationship has been restored. There's no need to impose further punishment on a restorative view. Whereas a retributivist might say, no, there's still an imbalance and a punishment has to be made. So again, we can talk further if you all have questions about how to think about those two views, but I want to underscore that how we think about these big picture conceptual difficulties will affect how we think about the ordinary, concrete, brass tacks criminal justice policy issues that we think about when we're reading the newspaper. So that's that. That's sort of the conceptual problem. So how do we think about this interaction between what the Mosaic Law says about criminal justice versus what Christ seems to say about criminal justice? And then even if we find the retributive view attractive, which I do, I think that there is something, I do think there's something to that. The idea that justice sometimes demands punishment, demands satisfaction. We see that, for example, in Anselm's theory of atonement, right? That why was the crucifixion necessary? Because justice demands satisfaction for humanity's sin. So we can talk about that further, but I just want you all to see that how we think about that issue is going to affect how we think about what's the purpose of criminal punishment. What are we trying to accomplish? So next, even if we all agree on all of those very difficult issues, and I hope you see that they are indeed difficult, we now come to the factual complexity of criminal justice, which is itself significant. So this is just one example. There are lots and lots of examples of factual complexity in this area, but I just want to underscore one, which in my view is the most important. So this is the next slide titled Factual Complexity, What Causes or Prevents Crime. So I apologize for the folks here, it may be difficult to make out, but we have in the center of the slide a few charts, and these charts are taken from a recent Pew report, but the data is from two sources, the two authoritative sources on crime statistics, the Bureau of Justice Statistics, which does an annual survey of ordinary Americans, asking them if they've been victimized by crime. And then similarly, the FBI runs a parallel survey, not of individuals, but of police departments, asking police departments to report crimes that have been reported to them. So independent measures of crime that are the authoritative measures in the United States. And both measures show tremendous drops in crime from the early 1990s to today. So we can see that it's very, very clear, and it's very significant, and very, very significant. Folks who have, for example, lived in Indianapolis for a long time, I'm sure, can testify to this, that Indianapolis 20, 30 years ago was a different city. It was a different city than it is today, and a big reason is the decline in both violent crime and property crime. So that's an enormous success. That's great. It's great news that happened. And what is amazing, and I just want to underscore this because it's so easy to miss. In the 1990s, everyone understood crime was a serious problem. Crime had been increasing for the last couple decades, and there was a lot of efforts to try to figure out what could be done to fix it. And if you asked someone in 1990 what the crime rate was going to be 10 years down the road, almost no one would have said this. I mean, this decline really came out of nowhere, and it's amazing, 20 years later or so, we still do not have a strong idea about why it happened. So I just want to take a step back. an enormous success that affected and improved the lives of millions and millions of Americans. We have no idea why it happened. It just sort of like, one day we woke up and there were fewer crimes. So what are some proposed explanations? And we don't have time today to go through all of these, but all of these explanations that are on the left side of the slide, they have all been seriously proposed. I want to make it clear, I do not subscribe to all of them. I think, in fact, some of them it's pretty clear that they are not serious explanations. But the point is, there are 16 different explanations there that people have seriously proposed as contributing to the decline in crime. So a few that I do think it's pretty clear, at least we're partially contributing. One is simply fewer young people. So teenage 20, 30-something men constitute the vast majority of criminal offenders, and when you have a population where they constitute a smaller portion, you're going to have less crime. So a big part of the increase in crime over the last half century was the aging of the baby boomers. So the baby boomers represent a bulge in the population, and as baby boomers became teenagers and 20-somethings, there was more crime because there were more 20-somethings in the population. And as that population aged out of the age where people have the highest propensity to engage in crime, there was less crime. So that's part of it. Definitely not the whole thing, especially because crime continued to decline in the 2000s after that population shift occurred. Another theory, which I think it's almost certain that there is something to, which is especially surprising, I think, to a lot of people, is less lead abatement. It is amazing the amount of social benefit created by lead abatement programs, and the decision to remove lead from gasoline. Lead causes all sorts of psychological problems, and even if it doesn't create diagnosed psychological problems, it can lead exposure in youth can lead to reduced impulse control and therefore a propensity to engage in crimes. And so less lead in the environment. Once you get 20 years later and the people who were not exposed to lead become teenagers or 20-somethings, we have less crime. So that's, again, very likely part of the explanation. Probably hard to describe what's going on in the 2000s. More incarceration, more people in prison, probably, especially more people who are of the particular age that are likely to engage in crime, is going to produce less crime. So that also is probably part of the answer. Now, however, I want to pause here. This example, I think, is why I think there's something to be said for a retributive theory of justice. So even if it is true, and I do think it is at least somewhat true, that more incarceration reduces crime, that in and of itself, if you're a retributivist, cannot by itself justify increasing incarceration. Why is that? Because people are not means. They are ends in and of themselves, which means that we can't punish people, we can't over-punish people in order to reduce less crime. That's disproportionate punishment is taken off the table from the beginning, regardless of the consequences. So I want to underscore that. So even if you're a retributivist, which are generally, we sort of think of the retributivists as the draconian types. But as Augustine said, retributivism, a commitment to proportionality, is an important limit on our decisions to punish. So that even if we were to conclude that if we over-punish people, if we throw people in jail for 60 years because they were dealing small amounts of crack cocaine, for example, even if it were true that significantly reduced crime, if we think that such a punishment is disproportionate, then as retributivists, that's off the table. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it would do lots of good. We can't. Not only can we not punish innocent people, we can't over-punish guilty people, and that's an important point. So I just want to note that we can take this empirical question seriously without thinking that our answer to that question will necessarily result in a particular policy prescription. So there are lots of other explanations there, lots of other potential explanations. Again, I think several of them are simply not substantiated or don't fit very well with the chronology. But I think I just want you all to see that one of the big questions in criminal justice policy is, how do we reduce crime? Which is an important question. Crime imposes enormous costs on society, not just for victims, but for their neighbors. And it's something that we need to take seriously and continue to take seriously, even in spite of the improvements we've seen in the last 20 years. But that important question, that crucial question, we really are in the dark in many important ways. Now, I do think, as we said, we can be confident about that a few of these proposed explanations probably did contribute to the decline in crime, and that means that there are things we can do on the margins. And so this goes to the last slide, Sam. So as I was preparing this yesterday, I was a little worried that after going through all of these, this extended discussion of what we don't know, that it would be kind of discouraging for you all. So I want to conclude, one, by recalling Augustine's description of the Christian judge in City of God, which I just find so powerful. And that quote is on the left side of the slide. And here again, we see there's all kinds of factual complexity, not just with big policy questions, but in individual cases. Frequently, we won't know what the truth really is. We are seeing through a glass darkly. And Augustine realizes this. He says, he says, we must nonetheless condemn human life as miserable. I just love that. That's, very Augustinian. Can't get more Augustinian than that. But it's true. He recognizes that we live with a lack of access to the full truth. But the important part is, Augustine doesn't tell the Christian judge, so retire, go do something else. He says, no, it's still necessary. It's still necessary. Feel the weight of that uncertainty. You need to feel it, and if you don't feel it, then you don't fully appreciate the reality. You have to feel it, but nonetheless, you have to do your job. You have to make the best effort to do justice in the cases before you. And I think that balance is what we are called to do as Christians, including Christians who aren't judges. We know that injustice remains ubiquitous in our society, and including in our criminal justice system. And regardless of the theory of justice we subscribe to, we know that there are things that we can't do, as I mentioned earlier, about over-punishing. Because people bear the image of the Imago Dei, as we recall from Genesis 9:6. And we can be confident that through God's common grace, there will be opportunities for us to make important differences, to move the needle, move the ball in the right direction, to make our society a little more just. And so I encourage you all to think carefully about how we can do that. It is possible, and it requires a lot of humility, because as we've learned today, these questions really are very difficult. But I think thinking about them carefully and with charity towards others presents a real opportunity to do some good. So thank you, and I think we have a little bit of time for questions. If anyone has any questions or comments, either via Zoom or here in person. Yes, great.
Retribution versus restoration.
Mm-hmm.
Does it have to be a dichotomy, or can we as faithful Christians see them as retribution possibly as a means to the end of restoration as an example?
Yeah, so for the folks on Zoom, Greg asked whether retribution and restoration has to be a dichotomy or if they can be combined in some way. So two things. One, in some sense, I think there is an inevitable dichotomy because we have to answer the question, what is punishment for? And either it is intrinsically good or it's instrumentally good. And one of those has to be the answer. That they can't be combined. It's an either-or proposition. However, I do think that someone can subscribe to a restorative view of justice and combine that view with some of the limitations of the retributive view. So, for example, regardless of whether or not you subscribe to a retributive or restorative theory of justice, disproportionate punishments are off the table. Punishing innocent people are off the table. So there are some things that are common between the views that we can subscribe to, even amongst people who take slightly different views. But I do think that there is a difficult question. So you have a juvenile who committed a heinous crime, and they've been in jail for 20 years and have been a model prisoner and have shown an ability to rehabilitate themselves, have shown contrition. If you take a retributivist view, you might say, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how good of a person you've been since. Like, this is what the proportion of punishment is this, and we have to impose it, period. It doesn't, sorry. That's what justice demands. But if you take a restorative view, you might say, no, especially if the victim's family is urging a more lenient sentence, you might say the relationship has been restored. There's no need to impose further punishment. So there are situations where we have to choose, about what it is that we're trying to accomplish and be clear about that. So yes, I do, that's a very good question, but I do think it is important to underscore that there are situations where both views will offer the same sorts of conclusions, and we can't. I don't want you all to miss that, because there are some things we can be clear about. Yes.
Well, maybe this is too detailed, but in that case, victim's family is his family who abused him. How does that make him feel? I mean, that's complicated.
Yes, it is complicated. So the question was how do the circumstances of the offender's upbringing affect punishment? And this is a very that particular case, and the more general question implicates a profound problem, which I will just offer to you before we dismiss as a teaser. So the criminal justice system necessarily can only look at outward acts, right? It can only look at outward acts. And the Psalms tell us God sees the heart, right? And in my view, the things that make us ultimately morally blameworthy or praiseworthy are acts of the will, right? It's acts of our heart. It's not ultimately our actions and the consequences of our actions, but acts of our heart. And the problem is sometimes by chance, by things outside of your control, whether it's your upbringing or an outside circumstance. I was telling Sam as we were preparing for this week, lots and lots of us, I'm sure, occasionally look at our cell phones when we're driving. And I'm sure we do. I know I'm not getting a lot of nods in person, but I know that happens. And the thing is, like, most of us realize, we shouldn't do that, but it's not a heinous crime. It's not a heinous crime to look at your cell phone. You shouldn't do it, but it's not a heinous crime. And no one is going to be punished, and if you are punished, it's going to be a relatively minor fine if you do that. But if you do that and a small child runs out in front of your car and you kill them, like, that's going to be serious. That's going to be a serious crime, and you're going to face serious punishment. And the important thing to see is the difference between those two scenarios have nothing to do with your will. It's circumstances outside of your control. And the criminal justice system has to approach those situations differently. It has to. It has to respond to practical consequences. But that means that sometimes the punishments that are imposed by the criminal justice system will depart from what, if we think seriously, might be the moral blameworthiness of a particular action or a particular person. And that adds yet another difficult layer of complexity. Because, for example, most of us intuitively realize that someone who has grown up in a horrible household under an enormous amount of abuse is going to be less culpable for bad actions than someone who had all of the advantages in the world. Most of us kind of understand that. The difficulty is, from an outside perspective, we can't see inside people's hearts. So it's very difficult for us to understand, to tailor our penalties in light of those circumstances. And there are lots of ways in which the criminal justice system attempts to do that, certainly. And in fact, the case I mentioned is one example where the criminal justice system tries to do that. But that is yet another area where, because what we are ultimately concerned about is the moral blameworthiness of a particular act of the will, but we can't see inside someone's heart. We can only see what they do. That is another reason why imposing punishments is such a tricky exercise. So thank you for that question. It points to yet another difficulty here. If you want to look into that issue further, it's the subject of considerable contemporary philosophical debate. It's called the problem of moral luck. And when we circulate some resources later today, I'll be sure to send an article on that to Sam so y'all can look at it. But we are now, I think, ready for second service. So for those of you who are attending second service, go out the back doors. If you've already been to first service, maybe you can stay back a little bit to let those who are going to second service head out. But thank you all, both in person and on Zoom, for joining us today. I hope it was edifying. So thanks all. God bless.